Montana Territory, May 1881, the wind whipped hard off the Bitterroot Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and snowmelt across the dirt road as the stagecoach door slammed shut behind her. Josephine Norwood stood with her valise at her feet, fine boots caked in dust, and the letter her father had sent her creased and cruel still folded in her coat pocket. "You've made your choices," he had written. "Do not look to this house for shelter again." She looked nothing like the other passengers filtering off the coach, not in her fitted traveling coat or the pearl buttons on her gloves. But it did not matter here, not anymore. She was no longer the daughter of Franklin Norwood, head of the Norwood Mining Company and heiress to a Denver fortune. She was just a woman left behind. Josephine blinked hard and turned her face to the wide land ahead. Hamilton was a small town tucked against the mountains, more fir trees than people, more horses than carriages. It was the place her mother had once spoken of with a softness in her voice, back when she was still alive. Her mother had grown up here. Josephine had nowhere else to go. A wagon rattled past the depot and the driver pulled up short. "You need a ride, miss," she hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I am looking for work and a place to stay." The man rubbed his jaw. "Try Grace Weaver's boarding house. 2 blocks east, then north." She thanked him, lifting her skirts and walking fast, even as her feet ached. She had not eaten since dawn. Her gloves itched. She kept her chin high. The boarding house was clean but small, run by a widow who eyed Josephine's fine coat with suspicion. "You cook?" Grace asked. "Yes," Josephine said quickly. "And I clean, I can sew," Grace considered. "You can have the attic room. Work starts at dawn." "No complaints." "I will not complain." Josephine slept that night beneath a sloped ceiling and a worn quilt, her fingers curled around the edge of the mattress. She did not cry. She would not. The next morning she met him. He was hammering fence posts along the edge of the field behind the boarding house, shirt sleeves rolled up, hat low against the sun. She noticed the quiet strength in his hands first, then the way he worked without rushing, without wasting energy. Efficient, focused. He looked up when she stepped outside with the laundry basket. Their eyes met. "Morning," he said, voice low but kind. "Good morning." He tipped his hat. "You staying here now?" "Yes," she said. "I just arrived." He nodded. "I'm Vaughn Whitaker. Work the McLaren Ranch just yonder." She was not sure why she said it, but it came out before she could stop it. "I am Josephine." "Pleasure," he said, and went back to work. She watched him for a moment, then turned to hang the sheets, her cheeks warm, days passed in rhythm. Work, sleep, repeat. Josephine scrubbed floors, chopped vegetables, mended shirts. She kept her back straight and her voice calm. She did not speak of Denver. She did not speak of her father. She did not speak of why she had refused to marry the man he had chosen for her, a banker nearly twice her age who treated her like a prize to be owned. Vaughn was always nearby, fixing the chicken coop, hauling firewood, leading a bay mare down the road. He never lingered, but he always spoke to her. Small things, weather, horses, trails to avoid after rain. One afternoon she brought him lemonade without being asked. He took the glass, his fingers brushing hers. "Thank you. You are welcome." He drank, his eyes on her. "You're not from here." "No, you running from something." She met his gaze. "I am starting over." He nodded, slow and sure. "That takes grit." Josephine looked down. "I hope so." By summer she had blisters on her palms and sun on her cheeks. She had never worked like this in her life. But she slept better now, bones tired and heart quieter. She had started to look for Vaughn before she even realized she was doing it. Her eyes would drift to the road, to the fields, to the stables. When he was near, she found herself smiling easier, he noticed. "You look less like a bird ready to fly off," he said one evening. "And you look less like a man afraid to speak more than 10 words, he grinned. "Maybe we are both changing." Maybe they were. Then came the fire. It started in the barn behind the boarding house. Lightning struck dry straw. The smoke rose fast, black and choking. Josephine was in the kitchen when she heard the first scream. She ran out barefoot, skirts flying. The flames were already climbing the walls. "Help," Grace shouted. "My grandson's in there." Josephine did not think. She She threw off her apron and ran toward the barn, but Vaughn was faster. He pushed past her and into the smoke, ducking low. Josephine stood frozen, the heat searing her face. Then he came back out, coughing hard, a small boy clutched to his chest. The child was crying but safe. Josephine ran to them, dropping to her knees. She pulled the boy into her arms. Vaughn collapsed beside her, gasping. "He is all right." She touched his face, brushing soot from his cheek. Her hands trembled. "You could have died." He looked at her, his eyes dark and steady. "So could you?" She did not let go of his hand. Later that night, after the barn had burned to the ground and the boy was asleep in his grandmother's bed, Josephine found Vaughn sitting on the back steps, shirt torn, bandage on one arm. She sat beside him. "I owe you more than thanks," she said. He turned to her. "I would do it again." She searched his face. "Why?" He looked at her like she was the only thing left in the world. "Because you matter to me." She blinked, heart thudding. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have nothing but this." He opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring, no jewel, just a band. "I bought it a year ago," he said. "Did not know who it was for until now." Josephine stared at it, breath caught. "Marry me," Vaughn said. "Not because I have riches, I do not. But I will give you everything I have. My hands, my heart, my life." She did not speak. She just leaned forward and kissed him, soft and certain. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Yes." And Vaughn Whitaker smiled like a man who had just found something he never dared believe he could keep. The morning after the proposal, Josephine stood at the basin in the boarding house's narrow washroom, hands sunk in cool water, the ring heavy in her apron pocket. She hadn't worn it yet. Not because she doubted him, but because she wanted to be sure of herself. The kind of sure that lived in the marrow. A knock came at the back door, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. She dried her hands on her skirt and opened it. Vaughn held a small bundle wrapped in worn muslin. "It's not much," he said. "But I figured you might want to see it." Inside was a folded shirt, hand-stitched with uneven seams, and a tin locket on a fraying cord. "My mother made that shirt for me before she passed. I was 15. She didn't know much about sewing, but she tried." He glanced at the locket. "That's her and my sister. I keep it close when I ride out." Josephine ran her fingers along the edge of the cloth. "Why bring this to me?" He looked at her without blinking. "You said yes. I want you to know where I come from, what I carry." She nodded and lifted the bundle carefully. "Then come with me." They walked through the orchard behind the livery, where the apple trees had just begun to flower, pink and pale white. At the far end stood a bench beside a heap of stones, what had once been the foundation of a cabin. "My mother was born here," she said. Her name was Miriam Calloway before she married. That cabin was her childhood home, burned down in '69 after a harsh winter. She never came back after marrying my father. She paused. She wanted to, but he didn't allow it. Vaughn looked toward the stones. "You ever think of rebuilding it?" "I do," she said. "Sometimes when I can't sleep." He stepped closer. "Then let's build it again, you and me." Josephine felt the words settle inside her like warmth after frost. "With our hands." "I don't have any others," he said. She reached into her pocket and took out the ring. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she slid it on. "All right," she whispered. "Let's build it." That evening, Grace set out a pair of plates at the end of the long kitchen table and raised an eyebrow when Josephine sat beside Vaughn. "Well," Grace muttered, "it's about time someone around here did something brave." Vaughn chuckled softly. Josephine glanced at him, mouth curved slightly, then turned her attention to the stew. Later, they walked the long way around the edge of town, past the creek where the frogs had begun to sing. Josephine picked a branch of willow and trailed it along the grass. "Did you always want to ranch?" she asked. "No," he said. "I thought I'd be a blacksmith like my uncle. But he passed before I finished learning. Then I took to horses. They don't lie to you. And people do." He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes." She stepped closer. "I won't." "I know," he said. They stopped beneath the cottonwoods. The sun had almost gone, the sky a deepening blue, the stars just starting to appear. "We'll need lumber," she said. "And nails." I can trade for some, he replied. I've got an old saddle I don't use, and I can sew bedding, she added. Mrs. Phelps at the mercantile needs help with her boys' shirts. He reached for her hand. You sure about this? His voice was low, but there was no uncertainty in it. Yes, she said. I'm sure. He leaned in then, his mouth brushing hers. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that felt like it belonged to the land and the wind and the life they were beginning to shape together. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest. I never thought I'd be happy again, she whispered. You will be, he said. We both will. And beneath the stars, with nothing but the sound of the creek and their quiet breath between them, Josephine believed him. The first frost came early that September, coating the grass behind the boarding house with a thin gleam that crunched beneath boots. Josephine stepped outside with her shawl tucked tight, a basket on her hip, and watched the breath rise from the mare Vaughn had tied near the orchard. He had come at dawn, as promised. We'll need to ride out by sunup tomorrow, he said, helping her lift the basket into the wagon bed. The timber mill west of Corvallis sells scrap bundles for half price if you take the warped pieces too. She pulled her gloves tighter. Will it be enough? It'll stand, he said, if I notch the corners right and we brace with rail ties. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold through winter. She climbed onto the bench beside him. Then I'll bring the hammer. They passed the outskirts of Hamilton in silence, the road rutted but dry, horses pawing steady. Josephine settled into the sway of the wagon, watching the fields fall away into clusters of pine and aspen. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Her fingers curled around the edge of the seat, steadying herself. Vaughn glanced over. You ever build anything before? Only gingerbread houses at Christmas, she said. They always fell apart, he chuckled once. Well, I'll keep the nails straight. They reached the mill near midday. The foreman squinted down from the platform, saw Vaughn, and waved them through. Josephine climbed down and followed Vaughn through the piles of lumber, stepping over bark and twisted planks. Take what you can carry, the foreman called. That pile's yours if you can haul it. The boards were uneven, some cracked, some curved, but Vaughn tested each with a practiced grip. Josephine took the shorter pieces, stacking them carefully in the wagon. Her arms ached before the first hour passed. She didn't stop. By the time the sun dipped low, the wagon was near full. Vaughn wiped his brow with his sleeve and nodded toward the last few boards. We'll have to bring the rest another trip. Josephine leaned against the side rail. If I can hammer better than I can lift, we'll be fine. He passed her a tin mug of water. You will. On the ride back, she asked about the ridge to the west, the one they would build near. There's a spring that runs even in the dry months, he said. Soil's poor for crops, but the grass keeps well. I've seen deer bed down near the slope. Will we have space for a garden? He nodded. If we clear the stones. I want to grow beans, she said. And lavender if the ground will take it. He looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the reins. We'll try, every bit of it. They reached the boarding house well after dark. The lanterns inside had burned low, and Grace had left a covered plate on the stove. As Josephine stepped down from the wagon, Vaughn caught her hand. I'll come by before first light, he said. We'll haul it out to the ridge. She hesitated. Do you think they'll laugh? Who? The town, at us building a cabin out of scraps. He shook his head. They might. But it won't matter once the roof's over our heads. She nodded, then leaned up and kissed his cheek without thinking, just once, just enough. He watched her go inside without a word. The next morning, she packed bread, dried apples, and a folded scrap of cloth she'd stitched with blue thread the night before. It wasn't anything useful, not a blanket, not a shirt, but it was the first thing she'd made for the house. Vaughn met her near the orchard. They loaded the last of the boards, hitched the mare, and turned west toward the ridge. They worked until their shoulders ached and their hands blistered. Vaughn dug the first corner post with a borrowed spade, and Josephine steadied the frame as he raised it. The sun burned the tips of her ears, and her palms stung where the hammer slipped, but the walls began to grow, plank by plank. That night they camped beneath the skeleton of the frame, wrapped in their own coats, backs to the wind. Vaughn built a small fire in a ring of stones. Josephine warmed her hands and looked up at the stars through the rising beams. "I never thought this would be my life," she said, "but I don't want anything else." He passed her a piece of bread. "You've built it with your own hands, that makes it yours." She turned toward him. "Ours?" He nodded. The wind shifted and the fire crackled. Josephine leaned her head against his shoulder and Vaughn rested his cheek lightly against her hair. There were no walls yet, no bed to lie in, no door to close against the night. But they had what mattered: promise, grit, and a place to call their own. And for the first time in her life, Josephine Norwood felt truly rich. They raised the roof just before the first snow. Vaughn had fashioned cedar shakes from the flatter cuts, and Josephine nailed them down with a rhythm that settled deep into her chest. Each board was a small vow. This will hold. By early November, the walls were sealed. A stone hearth took shape along the north side, and a second-hand cookstove sat squat and waiting in the corner. It had taken 2 borrowed mules and nearly the whole McLaren crew to haul it up the ridge, but Vaughn had made the trade himself, offering a month's horse-breaking labor in return. Josephine swept the floor that evening, the smell of fresh sawdust and cold iron filling the space. She lit the oil lamp and watched the flame catch behind the glass. "We could bring the mattress up tomorrow," she said. "If the trail doesn't ice." Vaughn leaned against the doorframe, his arms dusty, one boot heel braced against the sill. "I checked the slope before supper." "Still dry," she set the broom aside. "I made a list of what we'll need come spring: window cloth, proper hinges, seed sacks." She paused. "And a cradle." He looked at her then, long and steady, no rush in it. "You're sure?" he asked. "I am." He stepped forward. "You feel well?" She nodded. "Tired, but steady." He reached for her hand, palm calloused from the same nails and whether that had roughened his own. "We'll make space for everything." She blinked once, then smiled, not wide but full. They slept that night in the attic room one last time, her back to his chest, the quilt tucked high, her hand resting over her belly. The wind pushed against the windows, but inside it was warm. The next morning they loaded the mattress onto the wagon, wrapped in burlap and rope. Grace gave them a sack of dried corn and a jar of preserved plums. "Won't be much company up there," she said, tying the last knot, "but I suspect you two won't mind." Josephine kissed her cheek. "We'll come down Sundays." The trail was slow going, the wagon creaking over hard ground, but by late afternoon the mattress was laid out in the corner beneath the window frame. Vaughn had carved a ledge along the sill wide enough for a lamp and a book. Josephine set a folded shawl there, one her mother had worn in Colorado winters. He watched her as she moved through the room, placing things where they'd live. A tin teapot beside the stove, a carved spoon on the mantel. A pair of baby shoes, still too small for use, tucked into a drawer he'd built from pine. "You want to marry at the church?" he asked, voice low, almost careful. She turned toward him. "I want to marry here." He stepped closer. "You don't want a preacher, I want a promise," she said. "One I can see when I wake, one that's been earned." He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "I wrote something down, didn't know if it was right to say it." She took it, hands steady. The words were plain, honest. Describing the life he wanted with her, a life of sweat and soil and quiet joy. And every line ended with the same thought: "I will not leave." She looked up at him. "Yes, here, now." They stood before the hearth, bare floor beneath them, snow just beginning to fall outside. He took her hand. She took his name. That night Vaughn lit the fire and set the kettle to boil. Josephine curled beside him on the mattress, her head against his chest. No guests, no music, just warmth and quiet and the sound of wind through the trees. He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We're home," she whispered. And they were. By late winter, the cabin had settled into its bones. The beams no longer creaked in the wind, and the hearth stones had cured against the cold. Every morning, Vaughn rose first to stoke the fire. and Josephine would wake to the sound of wood splitting outside and the low murmur of water boiling on the stove. She'd begun stitching a quilt from scraps of muslin and old work shirts, pieced together in squares that grew slowly over the bed frame. Some days she felt the tug of fatigue deep in her hips, but she moved steadily, never idle. The child she carried made his presence known in quiet shifts beneath her ribs. She spoke to him sometimes when Vaughn was away with the horses, her voice low and even. "You'll be strong," she'd say. But not hard. The snow had begun to recede by the time Vaughn came in one evening with his coat damp and a folded paper in his hand. Josephine sat at the table, peeling the last of the dried apples into a pot. "Marshall from Darby stopped me by the trail," Vaughn said. "Said there's a man asking after your name." She set the knife down. "He give a name." "Didn't need to," Vaughn said. "Said he came from Denver looking for his daughter." She didn't speak for a long time. The fire popped. The pot bubbled gently. "He'll want to undo everything," she said finally. "He always did." Vaughn laid the paper down on the table just beside her hand. "You want to go back?" Her eyes lifted. "No, you want me to speak to him?" She shook her head. "If he comes, I'll speak for myself." He nodded once, then reached for her hand across the table. "I'll be standing beside you." The man arrived 3 days later, a hired driver dropping him at the base of the ridge. He wore a wool coat finer than anything the town had seen in years, and held himself with the brittle confidence of a man used to being obeyed. Josephine met him just beyond the porch, a blanket wrapped over her shoulders, her belly rounding beneath her coat. "You've gone mad," Franklin Norwood said before anything else. She stood still. "I've gone free. You're living in a shack with some ranch hand. You could be back in Denver by week's end." "I don't want Denver." "You don't know what you're giving up." She glanced at the slope behind him where Vaughn stood near the woodpile, hands at his sides but eyes set on her. Then she turned back to her father. "You didn't come for me," she said. "You came for your name," he scoffed. "I came to save you." "I already saved myself." He stepped forward. "You're pregnant, you'll need doctors, money." "I have what I need." "You are throwing away everything your mother gave you." She looked him in the eye. "She gave me her spirit. That's what brought me here." He stared at her for a long while, then turned without another word, boots crunching back down the path. She didn't watch him go. That night, she and Vaughn sat beside the fire, her feet in his lap, his hand resting over the place the child now turned gently beneath her skin. "He'll never come back," she said. "No," Vaughn agreed. She looked toward the window, where frost had etched itself into delicate branches along the glass. "I feel lighter." "You are," he said. "You're not carrying his burden anymore." Spring came slow and cautious, but it came. The creek rose with meltwater, and the first wildflowers pushed through the thawed ground near the fence line. Josephine planted lavender against the east wall, her knees in the dirt, the scent already clinging to her fingertips. The baby arrived in early June, beneath a rain-heavy sky. Vaughn rode hard for the midwife in town and returned with her just as the wind shifted. Josephine labored through the night, teeth gritted, sweat slicking her back. Vaughn never left her side, not once. When the child finally came, red-faced and strong-lunged, he held him like he'd known him forever. They named him Elias Cowboy Whitaker. Vaughn built a cradle from the same cedar that made the roof beams. Josephine lined it with the quilt she had finished in April. Elias slept soundly from the first night, as if the cabin had been waiting for him all along. By midsummer, the garden had taken root. Beans climbed the trellis. The lavender bloomed. Vaughn added a lean-to for the mare and a narrow trough fed by the spring. Josephine hung linen on the line with Elias strapped close to her chest, his breath warm against her collarbone. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the ridgeline, they sat on the porch in quiet, watching the child sleep in a basket near their feet. "I thought I'd lost everything," Josephine said, "but I see now I was making space." Vaughn looked at her, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "I didn't know what peace felt like," he said. "Not until you." She turned to him. "We built this," he nodded. And we'll keep building. She leaned into him, their shoulders pressed close, the air soft with dusk and the scent of pine. They stayed long after the light faded, the child stirring only once, the land around them quiet and steady. There was nothing missing. No door left open. No piece of themselves held back. Their life was whole, and it was theirs. Forever.